flipping the table.
This is Michael, and it's Season 2 of Flipping the Table. This is a podcast featuring honest conversations about food, farming, and the future. I do this because I'm inspired by all the people you will hear. Some of them I've known for decades, and others I've just met. But each of them are creating the knowledge, the food enterprises, farms, and ranches that will make for a future that works better for us all. Hello, this is Michael. So it's been 45 days that I've been in lockdown since March 13th when I returned from a trip to LA after being exposed to folks who had just flown in from France and decided I needed to lock down because my parents are aged, didn't want to get near them. So I hunkered down for 14 days. And then during that 14 days, everything happened and shelter-in-place orders were made and people I know were coming down with the virus, and so it was, it's been an incredible moment. You've heard some of our podcasts focused on this topic. But before we get into our program today, our interview, our conversation with Thomas McQuillan, who's the Vice President of Strategy, Culture, and Sustainability from Baldor Specialty Foods, which is based in the Bronx, New York. Before we get into that, I just wanted to give you some thoughts, share some thoughts that I've had. I would say the good and the bad of this moment. And let me just start with the darkness. Obviously, amazing amount of people are suffering, and that is horrible. The frontline doctors and, of course, those who have come down with the virus, who have gotten extremely ill. Tragic. We're approaching 58,000 deaths today, which is how many people were killed in Vietnam. So that's a huge thing. 3 million cases globally. They say the president's even admitting, the administration, that we're going to go to 60,000, maybe 70,000 deaths. So this has been big. The kids are going crazy, not being able to go to school. I have friends and neighbors whose kids would be graduating from high school in the next few weeks, and that's all been called off. So there's a lot of grief. On top of that, my mother, 86, is in her last hours potentially, or days. So there's a lot going on for me around grief and feeling a lot off and on flowing through me. But also there are, I should also mention all the businesses, all the business people who are being hurt, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. That is a great tragedy. I think about all the restaurants that I love, and I know that these restaurateurs and the cooks and the front of house staff are all suffering great economic damage, as is the nation, and that is worrisome, and I'm sure, all worry about what the future holds around that economic disruption that's occurring, maybe the biggest since the Great Depression. And on top of that, it doesn't seem like things are going well in Washington, D.C. in terms of the White House's leadership around all this. I have seen some amazing governors, Republican and Democrat, doing good things in the country to protect their folks in their states and to take action that is commendable and builds my hope and spirit. And that's probably the link to the positive news. Human beings are adaptable. Business people particularly are showing incredible spirit and thought. One of them we'll talk to today, Thomas McQuillan. We'll hear his story about that. But also in previous episodes, we've talked to people, small farmers, medium-sized farmers, large farmers, who are all in the midst of adapting to what's happening. Families, the nonprofits I work with are all adapting. Zoom meetings driving us crazy, but also allowing us to keep moving forward in this crazy time. But most important to me is that this whole thing has unveiled the insanity and the lack of connection to reality that our culture is displaying. We haven't embraced the fact that the world is completely interdependent and we need each other to avoid these problems and to then deal with them when they occur. And anyone who is thinking otherwise is in a grand illusion, and that my hope is that people are going to really wake up to our interdependence, our need to work with nature rather than against her, to collaborate with nature rather than fight nature and try to control nature. And there's lots of great conversations. My colleagues in this world of sustainable food systems are developing incredibly articulate messages to be delivered to both their constituents, but also the political leaders who have to set new policies to help us weather the 21st century, which is going to be full of these kinds of events. And we have to adapt to that, and we have to move to a mobilization of all people to change the way that we live, and not in a hurtful way, but in a way that will make us healthier, more resilient. And that's really what I'm focused on now. How do we help communities become more resilient? That's really the focus of Root to Change's work, my work, many of my allies. So, and I think this conversation today with Thomas McQuillan from Baldor Specialty Foods in the Bronx is a great example. You will see that Thomas is very engaged, enthusiastic, and experienced, and he has a talent for adaptation and invention, and 25 years of experience actually helping companies and actually educational institutions like universities turn around or launch new initiatives. So he's got a BA in administration from Duquesne University in Pittsburgh and a master's and an MBA from St. John's in New York. And he's been with Baldor Specialty Foods, which serves the New York metro area and beyond, for just 5 years. But in that time, he has taken some really creative actions. He, first of all, created something called imperfect produce, to take the produce that farmers usually have to compost or toss away because it's ugly, and he's used that to serve his clientele, which is restaurants and specialty retailers. And then he created another program called Sparks, which is the word scraps, as in food scraps, spelled backwards, Sparks. So these two programs have placed Baldor Specialty Foods in a new category in the food business, and I would call it. He's now, helping to lead a green business with an ecological, social, and financial set of goals. And but amazingly, what impressed me the most about him was that he practices what he preaches. I came to interview him last November on a Sunday in his home with his family, and because when I walked in, I could actually smell it. He explained how his family collects all the food scraps from the week, and then on Sundays he uses a food processor to reduce it all down into a slurry, and then he creates a soup which they eat on Sunday afternoons. And so he really practices what he preaches, and I always appreciate that about someone. So as I said, I taped this last November when I was back east and visiting him, and so the focus of it was really about these waste reduction programs and their distribution in restaurant businesses. And this was all before the pandemic. So I called him last week to get an update related to what they've done in this moment. And of course, I was not surprised. I learned that once again they have shifted their business, and they have focused without abandoning their waste reduction programs. They are now delivering retail boxes up and down the East Coast to customers. And that is an amazing thing. They had to figure out how to repackage and reduce the size of their shipments. They had to figure out how to connect with these customers. And I'm sure they're working through others who have direct relationships, but they are really an amazing example of how creative entrepreneurs who are in touch with reality can take lemons and turn them into lemonade. So I trust you'll be impressed and inspired by Thomas McQuillan, Baldor Specialty Foods. Thanks. So, Thomas, thank you very much for hosting us here today in Greenwich, Connecticut. Beautiful home. Nice
Welcome.
place.
Well, thanks for being here, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about these important issues.
They are important, and I'm grateful that your company is thinking about them. So why don't you explain to the audience just kind of your personal arc? How did you get to Baldor? What's the story that got you there?
So it's we're all connected to food for various reasons, but at the end of the day, all of us are connected to food. The food system is a complex system of people and organizations that come together to deliver what seems easy, oftentimes to the end user. But from my perspective, it's a complex system that requires lots of hands and lots of different companies and different industries to actually bring us our food. What brought me to the food system was initially a passion for food. At a
like to cook, 'cause I saw
I
your
like to
kitchen, I saw
cook.
what you're doing in there.
I like to cook, and at a very young age, I had the opportunity to work on a farm. I worked in a restaurant during high school.
Did you grow up here?
I grew up not too far, just across the river in New York, in Rockland County, and I worked at the Clarksville Inn in West Nyack, which was a wonderful restaurant at the time. No longer a restaurant, now it's a bar. And I had an opportunity to get closer to food and work with food and understand all that goes into providing delicious and nutritious food to people. So I've been connected to it for a very long time.
And then, what did you? How, did you just jump to Baldor from there? How did that happen?
So my career sort of spans three areas. My first third of my career was in higher education, working with graduate business programs, both at St. John's University in New York and Temple University in Philadelphia. And then for about 13 years, I was with a company called IDC Corporation, which I ultimately became president of and an owner of. IDC distributed various construction supplies in the New York metropolitan area. I sold that business in 2012. Stayed on for a couple of years as president, and then left the company and was thinking about getting back into the food system. And I had the great fortune of meeting the owner of Baldor through a very good friend of mine who happens to be his cousin. And I met TJ Murphy in 2014 and agreed to come on board and start working on different projects for both TJ and the president of the company, Michael Muzak. And so together we sort of started looking at issues confronting the business. And one of the first ones that we tackled was trying to make sure we put 100% of the food that's either produced at Baldor or distributed by Baldor to work feeding people. And so that took us on a very, very long journey and to where we are today and what we're talking about.
Okay, so when you say feeding people, you mean not wasting it, not
right.
Okay, so tell us about that.
Right. So Baldor is a distributor of produce and specialty food. We're a very large privately held distributor. We distribute from Portland, Maine to Richmond, Virginia. We have 400 plus trucks on the road each day.
Wow.
Within that world of produce, we own a company called Fresh Cuts that processes about 1.5 million pounds of produce a week.
Wow.
In that production, there's food left over. And 5 years ago, that food was captured and sent to a transfer station and ultimately either made it to a compost facility or was discarded as trash. And we looked at this food and we decided 4 years ago that we were going to try to find solutions for this food. And unfortunately, at that time, and even to this day, there are a lot of people that look at the food that remains from food production as a waste item. We choose at Baldor to look at it as edible food, always look at it as food and find a use for it. So we partnered with a company called Willenta Feed in Secaucus, New Jersey, that takes all of the food remaining from our production and converts it into an animal feed. They dehydrate it, turn it into a pellet, and it's fed to poultry.
Wow.
So that solution has allowed us since November 10th, 2016, just 3 years ago, to become a zero organics to landfill company from our Fresh Cuts production.
Wow. So let me dig into that a little bit. So when you say poultry, is that a regional poultry industry? Is it shipped across the country? Does it go down to the Maryland area?
So where Willenta actually distributes, I am not clear, but I just spoke to the owner 2 days ago and asked him that very question. And I said, I'd love to get together with you and better understand the full system and what actually happens to the food that you dehydrate from us. They're combining our food with other food products that might otherwise be wasted, like leftover breads and so on. And so I would imagine their reach is pretty broad, but I'll get some more information on that. But one of the things I was excited about that solution, it sort of inspired us to think about other ways of using this food in addition to animal feed. So as an example, we partnered with some chefs to capture carrot peel from our production. Take that carrot peel, pulverize it, and make carrot cake out of it. We're partnered with a company that's taking carrots, onions, and celery and making stock from it. Carrot peel, carrot tops, celery bottoms, and onion tops and bottoms. Food products that might not otherwise be used, but now we can utilize them to make a food item for human consumption. And we really like those solutions because we believe it elevates the use of the food, and that's really our goal at Baldor.
Wow, that's beautiful and so encouraging, because we know, as many in the audience may know, up to 40% of the food in the United States ends up as waste.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of implications. People are hungry. Food's more, it's not as efficient for the markets, and obviously you have a lot of greenhouse gas problems.
Right. Well, I so appreciate you asking and raising that issue. In my mind, food always has to be utilized 100% of the time. What do I mean by that? Food that's grown on our farms in our country and around the world needs to be either consumed by human beings, consumed by animals, used to create energy, and or compost, or ultimately our next soil system. That's the only option for food. We can no longer discard food as though it was to be treated like a liability. I've asked many chefs over the years when we've been creating our solutions, at what point does food become waste? And categorically, they say as soon as we scrape it off the cutting board and put it into the garbage pail, it's waste. So I challenge them with this. What if that food never made it into the garbage pail? Is there a way to think of other uses for it? And this is my challenge to chefs. This is my challenge to Baldor. Can we find ways to fully utilize food? And this is a great time to talk about soil, because we oftentimes think about food, again, on the liability side of the balance sheet. Let's move it over to the asset side of the balance sheet. Even food that's post-consumer, food that we can't imagine has a use, that we imagine capturing 100% of the food we choose not to eat or choose not to feed to our animals, and create our future soil system. We need to better understand the value that healthy soil brings to us as a species and to protect our environment worldwide. We know so much more about the sequestration of carbon into our soil through healthy plant life. When soil is disrupted, either because we've over-fertilized it, we've used pesticides and herbicides that have destroyed the microbiome in that soil, all of a sudden, what starts cropping up? Dust bowls all around our country. And we wonder why this is happening. The overuse of chemical or synthetic fertilizers have created this disaster for not only us in the United States, but again, worldwide.
As a company, you were brought in, you were invited into the company and given a position to think about these issues.
Right.
Are you finding resonance among not just your colleagues in the company, let's say people who are working the line, or among your competitors, the people that are in your field? Is this something that distinguishes you, or is this something that you feel is catching on?
Right. I think you asked the question because you suspect that it, in fact, is not something that maybe is mainstream or broadly accepted as the way we should be treating food. And you're right to think that way. We have had to convince, in many instances, people within various levels of our organizations that this is the direction that Baldor wants to move in, and that they need to come along for this ride with us. Many, many people were very excited to be part of it. Some people needed to be educated about the value. They're not aware of the dangers that food in landfill present to us and our environment, and that the gases, as you suggested earlier, released from that food in landfill are in fact about 25 times more dangerous to our environment than the carbon dioxide
Methane
that's released. Anaerobic digestion process happens because the food does not have access to the oxygen it needs to actually break down without releasing that methane gas. So what are the solutions? If we are going to discard food and not consume it for whatever reason, that food has to be either composted, or we have to make a conscious effort to capture those gases and do something with them. And my thinking is, and all of our sustainability initiatives sort of check this box, can we reduce the waste at its source? And if we can, then we don't have to worry about treating the gas because we didn't create the waste in the first place. And that is how we attack these issues.
Great. And so let's talk about. I mean, you explained the challenges. The things that go on with companies when you start a new policy. You always have to educate. There are people that get it, and some people that need more education, as you pointed out. What about other folks in your world? I mean, do you think in 5 years what you're doing, the pace you're setting, will have been taken up by others?
I have never been involved with something with more momentum than the reduction of the amount of food that gets wasted.
Okay.
People are beginning to understand we need to take responsibility for these solutions. What I'm really excited about is there is a general acceptance to make change happen regardless of any affiliation, whether political, religious, gender, it doesn't matter. We're all in on this. And
that's also encouraging.
And it is so encouraging. And you know what it brings to mind? It brings to mind the notion that we wasted food for some reason in the past, which never made any sense.
Right.
But we're willing to understand why we don't want to act that way going forward. For context for the audience, we did not have a landfill in the United States before 1938. The first one opened in Fresno, California.
I didn't
in
know
1938.
I love that. I learned something new today.
And prior to that, there wasn't a landfill. There were places where we discarded things, but there wasn't a categorical acceptance of this particular land being chosen to place assets that we chose not to find value in. I could make an argument that the pie chart with all of the waste items that make it to municipal waste landfill sites can all be recycled, repurposed, reused. Every single one of them. There's very few things that can't be reused or upcycled. But the fact of the matter is, we find it acceptable in our culture, number one, to waste, and number two, to create these landfills. In fact, in many instances, we celebrate them. We look at them, we think, oh, we created this mountain in a place where there wasn't one, and we'll do something. We'll turn it into a park. The reality is, in our lifetime, there will be very bright minds that look at those piles and say, you know what, I'm going to extract the very assets that we chose to put in these piles.
Those are resource piles.
Those are resource piles. And certainly, we do not want to increase the amount of product we're sending those or even create new landfills. Think about the value of capturing 40%, as you suggested, of this food matter that we've chosen to either waste on the farm, waste in the packing sheds of the farms, somehow in transportation, at our distribution hubs, in our restaurants, or in our homes. If we start gleaning the value from that food and that whole chain, imagine a world where we could grow less, we could give back farmland to wildlife, we could use a lot less pesticides and herbicides. We can actually preserve perhaps the most important asset to us, which is our clean water, in such a responsible way because we don't even need it to grow this food because we're not going to consume that food. Right. And there are solutions around capturing this food. There's solutions around understanding what is edible and what is not edible. We also categorize what food we want to eat or don't want to eat based on visual appearance of that food. Has nothing to do with nutritional value.
Or its flavor.
Or its flavor. It simply has to do with its size, its length, a complexion issue. We have created this problem by suggesting there should be very specific specifications around food, which in my mind make absolutely no sense. And the general public is getting to a point where they're saying, no, the cucumbers can be wider. They can be shorter. They can be awkwardly designed or bent. And you know what? They're perfectly delicious. I oftentimes say to chefs, what's the difference if the butternut squash is a little bit larger or smaller? As long as the flavor profile is there. Because at the end of the day, you're dicing it and pulverizing it and roasting it. What would matter about size? We can get away from sizing. And a lot of that food product that isn't chosen on the farm is simply because the farm or the grower shipper does not have a purchase order from an end user that says, I want this specific size. Well, if we get away from size, and if the grower shipper can communicate back that they have 20 extra cases of various sizes available, then we'll put that food product to work. So the solutions are there. I believe the will is there now. And with a little bit of education, we continue to see increased momentum.
Okay, that's a very encouraging description of what's going on in that. I'm really glad to hear this. So you mentioned something very important, which is the mentality that has us feel good or fine, acceptable about landfills. The truth of the matter is that all of our plastic problems really have to do with packaging. Almost, I mean, not just packaging, but packaging is a huge. I was just down in Baja a few weeks ago, and the amount of plastic bags is phenomenal on the roads everywhere. And if you travel in the developing world, you see that. The creek near my house in California, after a storm, there's so many plastic, plastic in the river. So I'm very curious about your company's thinking about food packaging. Like, where do you see that going?
Well, I believe the plastic, unfortunately, is here to stay. I don't know that a petroleum-based resin plastic, because of it's so mainstream and so many of our products are shipped in it. There's a good chance that for some time we are going to see products shipped in this type of plastic. What's very exciting is there are some new plant-based solutions that are coming into
Which means compostable. If they're plant-based, they're biological.
correct, that they would be biologically compostable. And there's some very, very exciting things happening. There's one company that comes to mind called Mobius, Mobius, and that company, I was just involved with an innovation forum where they won a very large prize to continue the scientific work that they're doing to extract linolene from plants to actually create a plant-based resin product. And that then can create films and so on, and that could be used in the produce and food industry. And they're also talking about being able to line cardboard boxes, as an example, to transport product. I think the way I think about it, I think we need to prioritize the areas where we can completely eliminate plastic from the food industry and maybe even in our own individual lives. But let's focus on the food industries for a second and come up with alternative products, or maybe not use plastic at all. Maybe you can completely eliminate it. And as I mentioned before, that would be the best solution for not having it left over. This is probably a good time for me to talk about this. We have to be willing to take responsibility for the whole life cycle of all of the products that we choose to consume. What do I mean? If you buy a product that is sold to you in plastic, you own that plastic. You own the production of the plastic. You own the transportation that went along with the product that you bought in that plastic. You own the product when you take possession of it and consume that food product, but you also own it when you send it for what you believe to be recycling. So why do I mention that? Because we can start making decisions to buy product that in fact isn't in plastic. And that's the message that then goes back to the grower shippers, and they say, well, maybe we don't use plastic to ship in. I would like us as an industry, the produce industry and the food industry overall, to prioritize where are the areas where we can make immediate change happen. One of them is wax cardboard. Wax cardboard is there's a paraffin wax film put on a cardboard box in order to give it the body it needs to transport produce, as an example. But unfortunately, that wax cardboard box is not recyclable. What happens to those wax cardboard boxes? Well, by and large, they make their way to landfill. How do we extract them? We either figure out a way to transport that produce in a container or box that is either reused or a recyclable cardboard box. And if we're able to do that, then fine. But if we still need something in that cardboard to make it more rigid, maybe we can come up with a plant-based film. Those technologies exist today. They're being tested. And I'm very excited about the impact that will have on the amount of product that's sent to landfill. Somebody asked me recently how much wax cardboard goes to landfill. I've seen various numbers, but it's no less than about 6 million pounds a year going to landfill across the country, but it's probably a lot more than that. So we can tackle that one first, and then we'll start looking at other solutions for other products. I don't think we could do it all at once. We'll tackle them one at a time.
Okay. And are you? Let's talk about the relationships that you have with restaurateurs, their interest in this issue, and then also about your sourcing. Do you guys? Is that whole idea of farm to table interesting to you? Is that part of your culture, or do you try to source during the seasons when you can from the New England, upper Atlantic states? I mean, how does that work for you?
So that's a huge question. I could answer that for a very long time. Let me say that the way we like to look at it at Baldor is that the customer, the restaurateur, curates the product. Baldor is the logistical arm to bring that product, just as you suggest, the farm to table. We are the two. So we want to allow our customers to understand that they actually curate the product. They decide what they need. We become that logistical arm. We are absolutely committed to it. We call it the local pledge. We actually ask our restaurateurs to take a pledge that says if a local product is available and is not 10% more in price, they'll take it. This has allowed us to procure millions of additional pounds of food product, which is materially changing the local food scene for a lot of local farms in our area. And we encourage our competitors and others to do the same. So that's an absolute commitment on the part of Baldor. But it is a fact that we do need to source worldwide, because a lot of the products that our restaurateurs and chefs demand, unfortunately, don't grow in this region. So bananas are going to come from other places other than New York.
Coffee.
And coffee, for example. And so, but we want to bring that product to Baldor as responsibly as we can. We want to work with our grower shippers so that they understand that sustainability for us means not only keeping things the status quo, which is oftentimes associated with sustainability, but we want to encourage them to take responsibility for the soils they're growing, regenerate those soils. We're selling lots of exciting products where farmers are materially changing the way they grow their food product. As an example, Joyce Farms raises, among other things, beef in such a way that the animals are given a much larger area to graze in, and they're never staying on the same land for more than a day, to give that grass the opportunity to grow much higher than typical grass grows for animals. And the animals are 100% fed and finished on grass.
Perfect. Okay.
That's the right way. And it ties back into that conversation we were having about soil, because if the grasses are in fact allowed to grow a little bit higher, they are accepting that energy that comes from the sun and reducing the temperature increases that happen to soil in the absence of grass. Mm-hmm. And even when grasses are cut too low, the sun is allowed to heat the soil in such a way that the microbes in the soil are disrupted by that sun. Right. But if you allow the grasses to grow, the animals want to eat the grass at a higher level.
And let's talk about that. Because this week and this weekend, a lot of conversations around sustainable food systems, and meat always comes up because there's so much real meat system and its dependence on grain and concentration and the waste and the greenhouse gas, all that. So as you look ahead 10, 20 years, do you feel that grass-fed is going to go from, 0.02% now? Do you see a lot of growth? Are you hopeful? Do you think there's enough pull-through from the retail side to actually get the stimulation of that industry?
Well, honestly, what's going to make the change happen are podcasts like this, because people are going to become educated about why all meat is not created equal. Mm-hmm. For the farmer, if you are running a farm in a regenerative style, you know that when that effluent or the poop that comes from the cow is consumed into that soil in a natural way, and the grasses grow all around it over time, and it doesn't just reside there like in a lot of conventional farms, it's very hard to remove the effluent from the animal. Why? Because the soil is so sick, it can't accept the nitrogen density that exists in that effluent and actually spread it out throughout the farm in the way that nature wants to do. Mm-hmm. So the farmer knows when things are not when nature is not exactly accepting the processes. But you see on a regenerative farm, on a farm where sustainability is taken very seriously, that in fact the farm looks healthier. The grasses look healthier. You can dig up the soil. It looks healthy. It's moist. It's dark. It's rich. The system is working. And what's very interesting is nature is continually trying to fix what we mess up. Right. And when we see it functioning well, like you do on a regenerative farm, you have to stop and think, that's the answer. Mm-hmm. And so as a consumer of meat, we have to be willing, if even in the short term it costs us a little bit more money, we're consuming a food product that's probably providing us better nutrition. Mm-hmm. I'll leave that for people to test. But certainly it's a delicious, nutritious food item grown responsibly that's not having negative impacts on our environment. We have to be committed to that. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, will help drive the change in the industry that we are desperate to see come about.
Okay, good. Give us some, we just have a couple of minutes left. So some thoughts, your thoughts about the future of your industry. You have kids, right? You have two.
Yes,
I met two kids.
Two teenagers. Yeah,
two teenagers. They're going to inherit this world.
Yeah.
And what's your feeling about that? What's your feeling about the future?
Well, both of them are involved in their environmental action club at high school, and I had spoken at a conference called the Food Asset Potential, organized by a very close friend of mine, Allie Giorse, here in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Friend of mine too.
She's lovely, and she had asked me to moderate a session on waste reduction overall and strategies to do so right here in Greenwich, Connecticut. My daughter happened to be in the audience. When we got in the car to leave the conference at the end, and I'm always fired up after these things because I just love these conversations.
You're passionate about it.
I have a little bit of passion. Right. I said to Jenna, Jenna, your generation's going to fix this. And she said, Dad, don't kick the can. You fix it.
Wow.
And that has really changed my perspective. I've really put my foot on the gas. I'm still there are a lot of hurdles out there, and I'm going to have to jump those hurdles. I have to convince people. I like to be in front of an audience of non-believers or unsuspecting folks who have never considered this issue. I had asked you early on who the audience was for the podcast, mm-hmm. and I'm hoping that people are listening who maybe stop and think, wait a minute, this makes total sense. Why didn't I think of this? The inspiration I'd like to leave the audience is this. Food is always an asset, 100% of the time. And in the food system, all of us, farmers, growers, shippers, transportation folks, distributors, chefs, restaurateurs, end users, have to make very deliberate decisions around food. And one decision that we cannot make is to waste food, ever, for any reason. We can do this. We can do this together. We have to do this. I have heard people talk about 8% of the impact, the negative impact on climate change is a direct result of the food that we grow and choose not to consume. So we have to make this change happen. This is probably the easiest solution to have a positive impact on climate change than any others that exist out there. Mm-hmm. So let's work together and find uses. And if at the very minimum, it's for your own personal economic gain, well, let's do that. If it's to have an impact on the environment, well, let's work together to have that impact. But let's also remember there are lots of people living around us that are food insecure. And when you choose to take food that you would otherwise not eat, that's perfectly edible, and share it, you're sharing love. You're sharing all the energy from all the people that got that food to you with somebody who's in need. And I say this often, the face of food insecurity are the most unsuspecting faces. It's oftentimes the widow living on your block who has all the money in the world but can't bring herself to cook and take care of herself. She needs you. Our community, our broader community needs you, and they need your willingness to share that food. The garbage pail is not the partner, right?
Well said.
That individual that's in need is your partner. So let's all join forces. And there's no downside. We need to do this together.
Thomas McQuillan, thank you very much for your time and for your good work. And I wish you and Baldor great success. And whenever I go to a restaurant between Virginia and Maine, I'm going to make sure that they are going to your company because you're just the kind of company we want to support.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
Hey, this is Michael. As you know, Flipping the Table is sponsored by Roots of Change. You can keep our program going by making a contribution to Roots of Change through our website, rootsofchange.org.
Flipping the Table.